So our next speaker, we're very, very pleased to have Peter Ford with us. Peter Ford is a former UK ambassador to Syria. He's held ambassadorial positions both in Syria and Bahrain during a long and esteemed diplomatic career in the diplomatic service. When he retired in 2006, he became a representative of the Commissioner General of UNRWA in the Arab world. Peter's been a long-time critic of the media's role in disseminating a narrative often slanted towards a regime change agenda. Given his ambassadorial time in Syria, obviously he particularly refers to the situation there. He's undertaken many interviews of late, which we've been very grateful for. He's done a sterling job. And particularly, he had an interview with BBC where he let them know the true nature of the white helmets, which was refreshing. He also had an interview on Fox News, which was very good, on the Tucker Carlson show, which was a very good interview. And I must say, Tucker Carlson let Peter speak, which was excellent. He's recently resigned from his position as advisor to the Royal Charity Organisation of Bahrain in protests at Bahrain's newfound support of Israel. So we are very, very pleased to welcome Peter Ford.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, everyone, for taking the trouble to come out this afternoon when you could have been watching the other concert in the park in Swansea. So I'm going to try and rock it a little today. The media are on trial, but what exactly are they on trial for? What's on the charge sheet? Well, the Leeds inquiry, you remember not very long ago, had its own charge sheet. The media were being investigated for being naughty, basically, doing naughty things like going through tabloidy things, going through people's dustbins, that sort of thing. This is trivial compared with what should be on the charge sheet, which is warmongering, aiding and abetting warmongering. You've already this afternoon heard several examples of that. I'm going to give you a few more, with particular reference to the recent flare-up over Douma, the alleged chemical weapons incident in that benighted corner of Syria. And I'm going to try to give you some of my experience as a practitioner of media. I've been fortunate enough, by virtue of my previous position as an ambassador and UN official, been privileged on account of that, being a sort of acknowledged expert, to get a foot in the door. And I'll share with you some of my impressions and some of the lessons that I've learnt. So my focus is going to be on the methodology that the media use, the weapons of mass deception that they use to pull the wool over our eyes, consciously or unconsciously in many cases. It's worth remembering that this phrase, weapons of mass deception, was popularized in the aftermath of the Iraq conflict. And it's this Iraq conflict that people need constantly to be reminded of. And when I get chance in media interviews, I do remind them, because it's all there. What we've been seeing over Syria, we saw previously over Iraq. And I'll come back to that as we go through. But you remember that the Iraq war was theoretically about WMD. It's always weapons of mass destruction, atomic, chemical, biological, whatever. For some reason, this is the huge bugbear, even though, as we've seen with the Skripal case, that very often these terrible, terrible weapons. They just give you a bad tummy. Anyway, WMD, it gets a reaction, gets your attention, doesn't it? And in Iraq, of course, there were these allegations that Tony Blair said, we saw the quote, that it was beyond doubt, except he didn't. We had the intelligence chiefs of this country and America and all the NATO countries assuring us that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and it turned out that they didn't. You had inspectors, professional weapons inspectors like Hans Blix and Scott Ritter, very reputable people, saying to the media that it just wasn't the case, that there was no evidence. But these inspectors were ridiculed. But it should have been the emperors of intelligence who were ridiculed. And they still, to this day, have not been held to account. Duma, the full panoply of these weapons of mass deception was in evidence when the crisis broke of the alleged incident. And note this word alleged. It's still to be proven, and personally I doubt it can be proven, that there were any chemical weapons used whatever in Duma. We're waiting to see the report come out by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Warfare, OPCW. They went to Duma, and we're waiting with bated breath to see their report, but I very much doubt that they will produce evidence to corroborate the claims made by the Western governments. But to date, that it remains unproven, and indeed, on any objective criteria, unlikely. And I was lucky enough to get opportunity in some interviews to make this point, that the reporting that was driving the hysteria wasn't based on fact, that everything had a different possible different explanation. Those videos that we kept seeing over and over again were never verified, but there was an alternative explanation, which was that there had been an ordinary bomb dropped on a nearby building. Kids went into a nearby clinic, and they were just being treated for smoke inhalation when the white helmets burst on the scene, grabbed the kids, hosed them down, posed nicely for the cameras, of course, who were always there, and hey presto, that's all it needed to trigger almost the next big war in the Middle East. That was the alternative and surely plausible explanation of what happened, rather than what I'd call a conspiracy theory that Assad, in a moment of surely total madness, did the one thing that was guaranteed to bring down the West on his head. I would call that the real conspiracy theory, not the obvious explanation that I've just described. So I had one or two chances to put this view in the media interviews, and one of the interviews was with Naga Munchetti on BBC Breakfast, and she spoke as though the alleged incident was established fact. And I reminded her that, hey, this video that you keep showing over and over and over again is unverified. Isn't it, Naga? She didn't want to reply. Isn't it, Naga, unverified? In the end, she said, well, yeah, it's unverified. But then Assad has got previous on this, hasn't he? He has a track record of mounting these attacks. So very likely the video is or can be verified. So stop for a moment and think what was going on in this exchange. I was presenting an alternative, plausible version of events, and she was behaving like the government spokesman. She took it on herself to counter my version and to speak like a government spokesman. Is this the role of the BBC? Increasingly, yes, it is. And this despite the fact that we had Iraq. You remember in the aftermath of Iraq, many people in the media acknowledged that they'd made mistakes and never again, we're not going to be bamboozled again. Totally forgotten. We suffer from mass amnesia as well as hysteria. Then there was John Bolton of Sky News. In my interview with him, I launched my own weapon, a soundbite. Because, little parenthesis here, when I'm lucky enough to get invited, I always try to prepare and be ready with some catchy phrase, a soundbite, because this is the way the media works, and you have to play them at their own game if you want to make an impact. So I said to John Bolton that with Duma, there wasn't even a dodgy dossier. They're not even giving us a dodgy dossier. And this Bolton was obviously a bit gobsmacked by that. But all he could think of saying in response was, well, I'm sure the government will come up with a dossier. And thank you. And that was it. And we're still waiting for the Duma dodgy dossier. Have you noticed? We still haven't had anything in black and white. And no wonder, because the government would be very hard-pressed to produce a convincing case. In fact, I think they know. This is why they haven't attempted to produce it, because they're not going to make the same mistake that Blair made, who did actually produce the dodgy dossier. But when you have a supine media like this, John Bolton's words are only remembered by me. Nobody's going to hold him to account, although I hope this will be recorded somewhere. Thank you. And I get an opportunity to go back. Sky, are you listening? And have another discussion, perhaps when the inspector's report comes out. You have to be a bit cheeky, with the media, because they're in the business not of information sharing, no, infotainment. That's the business that the news programs in particular are in, even the documentaries. It's infotainment. So you have to be part of that. You have to make it a bit entertaining by being challenging or weird or whatever. Different people do it in different ways. But what you must never do, I've discovered, is allow them to put you on the back foot, to go on the defensive. Like often in interviews, it's been put to me, how can you defend Assad? He's a monster, he's killing his people, barrel bombs. And I'll say something like, you talk to me about Assad? When did you last do a report on what the jihadis are doing in eastern Aleppo and Douma? When did you do a decent report on Yemen and what the Saudis are doing? You see the technique? Don't let them put you on the back foot because you've lost it then. I could give a long academic explanation of why what Assad is alleged to have done is exaggerated. I would point out, for example, that everything that we, the West, did in rescuing Mosul and Raqqa from ISIS is very similar to what has been happening in the cities of Syria, with what the Syrian army has been doing. Our media don't tell you that they're still in Raqqa pulling babies' bodies out from under the rubble there. And that's what we did. But even though it's children, the magic children, we're not interested. Doesn't fit the narrative. But when I get chance, if I get chance, I will remind viewers or listeners or readers of that important fact. I need to speed up. Moving on from Duma more broadly, the security agencies. One thing that strikes me is how in recent times these security agencies have moved more front theatre. And we had an example of this recently when the head of MI5. By the way, would the MI5 person who I'm sure is here like to... Never mind. I'm sure you're taking notes. So pass this message back to your boss. Andrew Parker, head of MI5, made a speech at an international conference a week or so ago, which was carried live on our national TV. I couldn't believe it when I tuned in by chance. Being carried live. Even Boris Johnson doesn't get that reverence. He should be so lucky. But the head of our national, our top secret policeman gets this reverent audience. And what was he saying? Well, it was a long diatribe about Russia mainly, a little bit about terrorism, how wonderful our agencies are in fighting terrorism, but it was mainly to excoriate Russia. And the media just gave it total reverence. A lot of what he was saying was very open to objection, to put it mildly. But the correspondents commenting later on what Andrew Parker said, not one of them asked or even thought of putting a question like, why are we being lectured by this unelected head of our secret policeman? What's the constitutional propriety? These people used to have the decency to stay in the shadows. And now, despite Iraq, despite them being responsible for carrying us into that war, they have the gall to come out and lecture us and tell us what's what and get more respect even than politicians. This is troubling. This is troubling people, the direction that we're going in. And in America, it's possibly even worse. I don't like Donald Trump, but I can see that the deep state in America is either out to get him or to control him. At the moment, they're controlling him. I don't agree that Donald Trump, by the way, is an unmitigated disaster. He's a mitigated disaster. He doesn't like foreign wars. That's something. But he's not very strong. He's not standing up against the deep state. Anyway, this Andrew Parker chap came out with this stuff about Russia, and the media just listened to him like it was Moses coming down with the Ten Commandments from Mount Sinai, the reverence of it. Finally, I'll just go back to the Duma episode. Once the balloon went up and the bombs started dropping, our media went into jingoism mode. I couldn't stand it. It was the glorification of war was unbearable. All we heard about was the devastating accuracy of our boys in blue operating out of that relic of empire, our base in Cyprus that proves how important and powerful we still are as a major power. This not one defense correspondent pointed out that of the targets that were hit, all of them had actually been inspected by the OPCW inspectors just a few months earlier and found completely clear. I mean, pause and just let that sink in, that we dropped bombs on this country where God knows there's been enough bombs being dropped on it, totally unprovoked. Syria, nobody even claims that Syria is a threat to us, but we bomb them on the basis of these sites which were cleared of chemical weapons by the OPCW inspectors that we respect. And the enormity of it. But nobody even raised that issue in the mainstream media that I know. And then there was the aftermath when the question became, oh, can the inspectors get in? Not one of the defense correspondents on their inflated BBC salaries mentioned who actually asked for the inspection. Immediately, the first claims emerged that there was chemical weapons. Who was it who actually asked for the inspectors to go there? Was it Britain? No. Was it France? No. Was it America? No. Was it Russia? Yes. Was it Syria? Yes. But you'd wait a long time to hear that very important nugget of information from our wonderful BBC, these paragons, this gold standard of reporting. So I will just conclude now with a personal sort of interpretation of this event today. What I hope it will help to create is a consciousness that we can't go on like this, because the next crisis is going to be much worse. And I very much fear that there is going to be a next crisis in Syria because it's so easy for the jihadis to mount an episode like Duma. They've done it repeatedly. They are bound to be preparing right now the next one. And the Western powers have painted themselves into a corner. They've promised that if it happens again, they will see what we're made of, and so they are bound. They've more or less committed themselves to going in much more heavily. Now, do they really have they thought this through? Regardless even of the rights and wrongs of whether it's true that there are chemical weapons or not, are they ready? Do they think that Syria will just behave like a punch bag every time? That Iran will act like a punch bag? That Russia will be humiliated? No, the next time it is going to be catastrophic. And even if it doesn't, even if not a shot is fired in the end, it can cause a tremendous world economic panic, because as soon as Iran starts to make threats, the Gulf, there'll be fears of the Gulf being closed, insurance premium will zoom up on tanker traffic, there'll be queues at the petrol pumps. And if it comes to that, hopefully governments will start to see sense. But this is the direction we're heading, and it's all driven by the media. The politicians are in a kind of symbiosis with the media, but if the media just started to be more cautious, remember the lessons of Iraq, we might be spared this. So I just hope that today's event will help to create that tiny little bit of doubt about trusting the media and be spread very widely. Thank you very much.